The night Ophelia Carver fed 3 bleeding outlaws in her kitchen was the night her life in Fort Lyon, Colorado, became forfeit. She had heard the desperate knocking long after midnight, when the mountain wind howled through the timber frames of her small house on the edge of town. Her husband had been dead 6 months, taken by fever during the harsh winter of 1878, and she lived alone now with only her medical books and the memory of his kindness. When she opened the door, 3 men stumbled inside, leaving dark trails across her clean wooden floors. They were young, frightened, and losing blood fast from wounds that looked like they came from a botched robbery attempt. Ophelia did not ask questions. She had learned medicine from her father, a traveling physician who believed that healing was a calling that transcended law and judgment. She cleaned their wounds, stitched torn flesh, and gave them what little food she could spare from her dwindling supplies. The outlaws left before dawn, pressing a handful of gold coins into her palm despite her protests. She threw the coins into the creek behind her house the next morning, but it was already too late. Sheriff Morrison came 3 days later with half the town council behind him. Someone had seen the men leaving her property. Someone always saw everything in Fort Lyon, a mining town that had grown suspicious and hard in the years since the Silver Rush brought desperate men flooding into Colorado territory. The trial was swift and merciless. The fact that she had been a respectable widow, that her late husband had owned a small but profitable dry goods store, that she had never caused trouble meant nothing compared to the crime of showing mercy to wanted men. They gave her 1 hour to pack what she could carry. No horse, no wagon, just what her arms could hold. The sheriff escorted her to the edge of town while hostile eyes watched from windows and doorways. People she had known for 3 years, women she had sewn quilts beside, men her husband had done honest business with, all of them turning their faces away as she passed. Morrison, at least, had the decency to look uncomfortable as he delivered the council's final judgment. "You got 2 choices, Mrs. Carver," he said, his weathered face creased with something that might have been regret. "Head north toward Denver, try to catch a train east, or go south through the valley, maybe make it to New Mexico territory. But if you show your face in Fort Lyon again, it will be jail, and the jail here is not kind to women." Ophelia adjusted the heavy pack on her shoulders and looked at the sheriff with eyes that had cried themselves dry over the past 3 days. "I helped dying men, Sheriff. I would do it again." "I know," Morrison said quietly. "That is why they fear you." She walked south because Denver felt too much like admitting defeat, like crawling back to civilization with her tail between her legs. The valley stretched before her, a vast expanse of high desert scrubland dotted with juniper and sage, the distant mountains still crowned with snow even though it was late May. She had $17 sewn into the hem of her dress, a canteen, some dried meat, and a stubborn determination not to die out here alone. The first 2 days were not terrible. The weather held clear and she found a creek to follow, keeping her canteen full. She saw antelope in the distance and once, a black bear that thankfully showed no interest in her. Her feet blistered inside her practical leather boots and her shoulders ached from the pack, but she kept moving, putting miles between herself and Fort Lyon. On the 3rd day, she ran out of food. On the 4th day, she finished the last of her water, and the creek she had been following disappeared into the dry earth. On the 5th day, she accepted that she was probably going to die. The sun was a merciless hammer beating down on the Colorado high desert. Ophelia's lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue thick in her mouth. She had stopped sweating hours ago, which she remembered her father saying was a very bad sign. The landscape swam before her eyes, all browns and dusty greens bleeding together. She stumbled, caught herself, stumbled again. When she saw the ranch buildings shimmering in the distance, she thought they were a mirage. But mirages did not grow clearer as you approached them, and these buildings became more solid with each agonizing step. A main house, constructed of adobe and timber, with a wide porch facing the valley. Several outbuildings, corrals with horses, the distant sound of cattle lowing. Smoke rising from a chimney, which meant people, which meant water. Ophelia made it to the edge of the property before her legs finally gave out. She collapsed in the dusty yard, too exhausted even to call for help, and the last thing she saw before darkness took her was a pair of worn leather boots walking toward her. She woke in a soft bed with clean sheets, in a room that smelled of wood smoke and sage. For a confused moment, she thought she was back in her house in Fort Lyon, that the past week had been a terrible dream. Then she tried to sit up and her body screamed in protest, every muscle stiff and aching. "Easy now," a deep voice said. "You have been out for near about 2 days. Your body needs time." Ophelia turned her head on the pillow. A man sat in a chair by the window, his frame backlit by bright afternoon sun. As her eyes adjusted, she took in the details. He was tall. She could tell even with him sitting, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard build of someone who worked cattle for a living. His hair was dark brown, sun-streaked at the temples, a bit too long and tied back with a leather cord. His face was striking rather than handsome, with strong features, sun-weathered skin, and eyes that were a startling light brown, almost golden in the bright light. He wore range clothes, a simple cotton shirt and worn denim pants, dusty boots propped on the window sill. She guessed he was perhaps 30, maybe a few years older. "Where am I?" Her voice came out as a harsh croak. He reached for a pitcher on the bedside table and poured water into a tin cup. "My ranch. The broken spur about 40 miles south of Fort Lyon found you collapsed in my yard. You mind telling me what a woman is doing wandering alone through the high desert with no horse and no water?" Ophelia tried to sit up again, and this time he helped her, his hands gentle but impersonal as he propped pillows behind her back. She took the water gratefully, forcing herself to sip slowly even though she wanted to gulp it down. The cool liquid on her parched throat was the most wonderful thing she had ever felt. "I was exiled from Fort Lyon," she said after she had drunk half the cup. "There seemed little point in lying. The town council gave me an hour to leave." His eyebrows rose. "That is harsh justice. What did you do, rob the bank?" "I helped 3 wounded men, gave them food and medical care. They turned out to be outlaws the sheriff had been hunting." She watched his face carefully, waiting for judgment, for the same cold condemnation she had seen in the eyes of her former neighbors. Instead, something shifted in his expression, a softening around the mouth, a warming in those golden brown eyes. "So they exiled you for showing mercy," he said quietly. "They said I aided criminals, that I chose the side of lawlessness over civilization. Did you know they were outlaws when you helped them?" "No, but I do not think it would have mattered. They were bleeding and frightened and in need. My father taught me that healing is not conditional." The man was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. Finally he stood, unfolding his tall frame from the chair and extended his hand. "Nathan Drummond. This is my land, and you are welcome to stay as long as you need to recover." She shook his hand, feeling the rough calluses of hard work, the strength in his grip tempered with care. "Ophelia Carver. I am grateful, Mr. Drummond, but I do not want to bring trouble to your door. If Fort Lyon finds out you are sheltering me, mercy is never a crime on my land," Nathan said, and the fierce conviction in his voice stopped her mid-sentence. Fort Lyon has no jurisdiction here, Mrs. Carver. The broken spur answers to no one but me, and I say you are welcome." Something in her chest loosened at those words, a knot of fear she had been carrying since the trial finally beginning to unwind. She blinked back sudden tears. "Thank you. And it is just Ophelia now, I suppose. My husband passed last winter. I am sorry for your loss." He moved toward the door, then paused. "You rest now. My housekeeper Louisa will bring you some broth in a bit. Take your time getting your strength back. We can talk more when you are feeling better." After he left, Ophelia lay back against the pillows and stared at the rough-hewn beams of the ceiling. She had expected to die in the desert. Instead, she had stumbled onto the land of a man who spoke of mercy like it was something sacred, who offered shelter without hesitation to an exiled woman he did not know. It felt like a miracle, and Ophelia had stopped believing in miracles 6 months ago when she buried her husband. But here she was, alive against all odds, in the house of a strange cowboy whose golden brown eyes held something she could not quite name, but that made her feel safe for the first time in weeks. The housekeeper, Louisa, turned out to be a round Mexican woman in her 50s with kind eyes and firm opinions about proper nutrition. She appeared with a tray of beef broth and fresh bread, tusking over how thin Ophelia had become. Over the next few days, Louisa became Ophelia's primary companion, helping her bathe, bringing her meals, and sharing the gossip of the ranch in a comfortable mix of English and Spanish. The Broken Spur, Ophelia learned, was one of the larger ranches in this part of Colorado, running about 2,000 head of cattle across rangeland that stretched from the valley floor up into the foothills. Nathan had built it from nothing over the past 8 years, buying the land cheap after the previous owner went bust. He employed a dozen men year-round, good men according to Louisa, loyal and hard-working. "Mr. Nathan, he is fair," Louisa said as she helped Ophelia into a clean dress that she had altered to fit. Ophelia's own clothes had been so filthy and damaged that Louisa had insisted on burning them. "He pays well, treats everyone with respect. The men would follow him into hell if he asked." "He is not married?" Ophelia asked, trying to sound casual. Louisa's eyes twinkled. "No, he is not. Many women have tried, but he says he is married to the ranch. Too busy building his empire to settle down, that is what he tells everyone." By the end of the week, Ophelia was strong enough to leave the bedroom. She made her way slowly through the house, taking in the simple but well-made furniture, the large stone fireplace, the windows that let in floods of Colorado sunshine. The house was clean but distinctly lacking a woman's touch, functional rather than comfortable. She found Nathan on the back porch, working on repairing a saddle. He looked up as she stepped outside, and a smile crossed his face that transformed his features from striking to genuinely handsome. "You are looking better," he said. "Got some color back in your face. Thanks to your hospitality." She moved to the porch railing, looking out over the vast spread of his land. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing, and closer in, several cowboys working with horses in the corral. "I have been thinking about my situation, Mr. Drummond." "Nathan," he corrected. "Please, Nathan. I am grateful for everything you have done, but I cannot stay here indefinitely as a charity case. I need to earn my keep, or I need to move on." The words hurt to say. The thought of leaving the safety of the Broken Spur, of heading back out into an uncertain world with no clear destination, filled her with dread. But her pride would not let her simply accept endless hospitality. Nathan set down the saddle and stood, leaning against the porch post and studying her with those perceptive golden eyes. "What skills do you have?" "I can sew and cook, though Louisa clearly has that well in hand. I know medicine and basic doctoring, which might be useful for a ranch this size." I can read and write and do figures. I kept the books for my husband's store. The medicine would be useful, Nathan said thoughtfully. We are a long way from any doctor. Usually when someone gets hurt, we just do our best and hope. And the books, yes, I could use help with that. I am not terrible with numbers, but I do not enjoy it, and my records are a mess. Then let me work for you, Ophelia said. Pay me whatever you think fair, and I will earn my place here. Nathan was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right, but not as a hired hand, as a partner. You keep my men healthy, manage my books, and in return you get a roof over your head, meals, and a share of the ranch profits. Does that seem fair? It was more than fair. It was extraordinarily generous, and they both knew it. Ophelia felt her throat tighten with emotion. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I could be lying about everything. Are you lying? No, but you have only my word on that. Nathan crossed the porch to stand beside her at the railing. Up close, he smelled of leather and sage and honest sweat, and she was suddenly very aware of how tall he was, how solid his presence felt. I am a good judge of character, he said quietly. I have to be out here. And I see a woman who chose compassion over safety, who risked everything to help people in need. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are, Ophelia. The way he said her name, with a slight softness to his deep voice, made her pulse quicken. She had loved her husband dearly, had mourned him truly, but what she felt looking at Nathan Drummond was something different, something that sparked hot and sudden in her chest. She pushed the feeling away, guilt flooding in behind it. She was a widow of only 6 months. It was too soon, too quick, too inappropriate. Thank you, she said simply, because anything else would have revealed too much. Over the following weeks, Ophelia settled into life at the Broken Spur. She converted a small room off the kitchen into a medical station, stocking it with supplies Nathan ordered from Denver. The Cowboys were skeptical at first, unused to having a woman doctor, but after she successfully treated a badly infected rope burn and set a broken finger that healed straight and true, they began to trust her. She also took over the ranch books and discovered that Nathan had been significantly underselling his own competence. His records were detailed and thorough, just disorganized. She spent long evenings reorganizing the ledgers, tracking expenses and income, and discovering that the Broken Spur was actually more profitable than even Nathan had realized. You have been undercharging for your beef, she told him one evening as they worked together in the ranch office, a small room off the main living area. The buyers from Denver are paying you $2 less per head than the going rate. Nathan looked up from the letter he was writing, surprise clear on his face. How do you know the going rate? I wrote to a cattle broker in Denver, said I was inquiring on behalf of a ranch in the Southern Valley. He sent back current prices. You are being cheated, Nathan. He pushed back from the desk and came to look over her shoulder at the ledger where she had done the calculations. His presence so close behind her made her skin warm, made her very conscious of every breath. They had grown comfortable with each other over the weeks, falling into easy conversation, sometimes working in companionable silence. But there was always this undercurrent, this awareness that seemed to hum in the air between them. I will be damned, he said, leaning closer to study the numbers. I trusted Jackson because he had been buying from the previous owner for years. How much has this cost me? Over the past 2 years, based on your records, probably close to $3,000. Nathan swore, creatively and thoroughly. Ophelia tried not to smile. I will send a telegram to Denver tomorrow, find a new buyer for the fall drive. Ophelia, this is incredible work. He put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of gratitude and approval, and the simple touch sent warmth flooding through her entire body. She turned her head to thank him and found his face very close to hers, those golden eyes looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. The moment stretched, charged with something electric and terrifying and wonderful. Then Nathan stepped back quickly, clearing his throat, his own cheeks slightly flushed. I should check on the horses before it gets full dark. Thank you truly for finding this. He left quickly, and Ophelia sat alone in the office, her heart pounding. She pressed her palms flat against the desk and tried to steady her breathing. This was dangerous. This feeling that had been growing steadily between them was dangerous. She was still a widow in mourning, even if her heart had started betraying that morning. And Nathan was her employer, her benefactor, the man who had saved her life. Getting tangled up emotionally with him could only end in disaster. But oh, the way he had looked at her. The way her entire body had responded to his nearness. She forced herself to focus back on the ledgers, but the numbers swam before her eyes. Summer deepened across the Colorado high desert. The days grew long and hot, the nights blessedly cool. Ophelia's skin tanned despite her bonnet, her hands growing rough with work. She found she liked this life, the rhythm of the ranch, the satisfaction of genuine labor. She doctored rope burns and bruises, a nasty kick from a horse that nearly broke ribs, and one terrifying evening, a rattlesnake bite that had her working through the night to save a young cowboy's life. Nathan stayed with her through it all, following her terse instructions, holding the delirious young man down while she made the cuts to drain the poison, never flinching even when blood ran hot over his hands. When the fever finally broke near dawn and the cowboy fell into a natural sleep, Nathan and Ophelia stumbled out onto the porch, both exhausted and splattered with blood. "You saved his life," Nathan said quietly. "Tommy is barely 19. He has a mother back in Kansas who would have been destroyed if he died out here." "We saved his life," Ophelia corrected, leaning against the porch post because her legs were shaking with exhaustion. "I could not have done it alone. You are remarkable, you know that." Nathan moved closer, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Truly remarkable. Fort Lyon was full of fools to exile you." "Nathan," she said, and his name came out almost as a plea. She did not know if she was pleading for him to step back or come closer. He raised his hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and she found herself leaning into the touch, her eyes closing. "Tell me if I am wrong," he said softly. "Tell me if I am seeing something that is not there." Ophelia opened her eyes and met his gaze directly. "You are not wrong." The kiss was inevitable, had been inevitable probably since the day she woke in his house and saw him sitting by the window. His lips were gentle on hers at first, questioning, and she answered by rising on her toes and sliding her hands up to his shoulders. Then the gentleness transformed into something deeper, more urgent. He pulled her close and she went willingly, pressing against him, tasting the salt and warmth of his mouth. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "I have wanted to do that for weeks. I have wanted you to," Ophelia admitted. Then guilt crashed through her again, cold and heavy. "But Nathan, my husband has only been gone 6 months. I should not be feeling this way so soon. What does it say about me that I am?" Nathan cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "It says you are alive. It says your heart has not died along with him. There is no shame in that, Ophelia. No shame in choosing to feel again. People would judge me. They would say I am being disrespectful to his memory." "Do I look like I care what people think?" Nathan's voice was fierce. "I have no patience for society's rules about proper mourning and appropriate behavior. Life is too short and too hard to waste time on such nonsense. If your heart is ready to move forward, then move forward. Honor your husband's memory by living fully, not by locking yourself away in grief. Ophelia searched his face, seeing only sincerity and that fierce protectiveness that seemed such a core part of who he was. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. I am falling in love with you, Ophelia Carver. Have been since you first woke up in my house and looked at me with those clear eyes and started asking hard questions. If you feel anything similar for me, then we have nothing to be ashamed of. Her breath caught in her throat. Just like that. You are falling in love with me. Just like that. He smiled, and it was the most open, genuine expression she had ever seen on his face. I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a couple months, but I have never been good at pretending not to feel what I feel, and I feel this. He took her hand and pressed it against his chest, over his heart. She could feel it beating strong and steady beneath her palm. Ophelia took a shaky breath. The proper thing would be to step back, to say this was too fast, too inappropriate, but she was so tired of Proper. Proper had gotten her exiled into the desert to die. Proper had demanded she turn away dying men because they had broken society's laws. Standing here with Nathan, his heart beating under her hand and his eyes full of everything she was afraid to name, she realized she was done with Proper. I am falling in love with you too, she said, and the words felt like freedom. Nathan's smile could have lit the entire valley. He kissed her again, softer this time, reverent, and when Lewis's voice called from inside the house announcing breakfast, they broke apart laughing like children caught stealing sweets. The following months were the happiest of Ophelia's life. She and Nathan were discreet for the sake of the ranch hands, but everyone knew. It was impossible to hide the way they looked at each other, the way they found excuses to work together, the way Nathan's entire face softened whenever Ophelia entered a room. They rode out together in the early mornings, Nathan teaching her the boundaries of his land, showing her the hidden springs and the best views of the mountains. He was a patient teacher, never mocking when she was clumsy in the saddle at first, always ready with a steadying hand. They talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Nathan told her about growing up in Texas, about leaving home at 16 after his father died, about the years of hard work as a ranch hand before he saved enough to buy this land. Ophelia talked about her childhood moving from town to town with her physician father, about learning medicine at his side, about her brief marriage to a kind man who had loved her, but never quite understood her restless need to be useful. He was a good man, she told Nathan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set in a glory of red and gold. He deserved better than what I could give him. Did you love him? Yes, but not the way I love you. The words came easily now, a simple truth that needed no dressing up. What I feel for you is different, more complete somehow, like you see all of me and want all of me, not just the parts that fit properly into a wife's role. Nathan took her hand, lacing their fingers together. I do want all of you. Your stubbornness, your compassion, your need to fix everything broken, the way you get a little line between your eyebrows when you are concentrating on the books. All of it. She leaned her head on his shoulder, content in a way she had never imagined feeling. The valley spread before them, peaceful in the fading light, and it finally felt like home. In late September, as the ranch prepared for the fall cattle drive, 3 riders appeared on the horizon. Nathan spotted them first, his expression growing wary. Riders could mean many things, but unannounced visitors were rarely good news. The men who dismounted in the ranch yard were dusty from hard travel, their horses lathered and tired. The leader was a man in his 40s with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest, though not one from Fort Lyon. His face was weathered and hard, his eyes cold as he surveyed the ranch. I am looking for Nathan Drummond, he announced. You found him. Nathan stepped forward, and Ophelia noticed how his hand drifted toward the revolver on his hip. "What can I do for you, Sheriff?" "Sheriff Carson, out of Trinidad." The man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "I am here about a woman. We have reports that you are harboring Ophelia Carver, who was exiled from Fort Lyon for aiding wanted criminals." Ophelia's blood went cold. She stepped forward before Nathan could respond. "I am Ophelia Carver." Carson's eyes raked over her, contemptuous. "You are under arrest, madam, aiding and abetting known outlaws, harboring fugitives. You are coming back to Fort Lyon to face proper justice." "She faced their justice already," Nathan said, his voice hard as iron. "They exiled her. She left Fort Lyon as ordered. She is on my land now, and you have no authority here." "The law has authority everywhere, Drummond. Step aside." "No." Nathan moved to stand beside Ophelia, and she saw that several of his ranch hands had quietly gathered, hands resting on their own guns. The air suddenly felt charged and dangerous. Carson noticed the men as well, his hand moving toward his weapon. "You planning to start a war over some woman who helped outlaws?" "If I have to." Nathan's voice was steady, absolutely certain. "Ophelia has broken no laws on my land. She healed wounded men because it was the right thing to do, and she was punished for it unjustly. I will not let her be punished again. Those were not just wounded men, they were the Garrett gang. They robbed 2 banks and killed a marshal down in New Mexico. Your lady friend there helped murderers." Ophelia felt the words like a physical blow. She had known the men were outlaws but murderers. She looked at Nathan, seeing the way his jaw had tightened, but his stance did not waver. "Did you know they were murderers when you helped them?" he asked her quietly. "No," she whispered. "They said nothing. They were just bleeding and afraid." Nathan turned back to Carson. "There is your answer. She had no knowledge of their crimes. She offered medical aid to wounded men. That is not a crime, no matter what Fort Lyon says. It is harboring criminals. It is basic human decency." Carson's hand tightened on his gun belt. "I have 2 deputies with me, Drummond, and a dozen more a half-day's ride behind us. You cannot fight us all." "Maybe not," Nathan acknowledged, "but I can make sure you pay a heavy price for trying. And then every other rancher in this valley will hear that the law tried to arrest a woman for showing mercy, and you will find yourself with no friends and no support when you really need it. Is that what you want, Sheriff?" The standoff stretched, taut as a wire. Ophelia could barely breathe, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. Around them, the ranch hands stood ready, loyal to Nathan in a way that might mean violence at any moment. Then one of Carson's deputies, a younger man with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Sheriff, maybe we should consider that Fort Lyon already handled this. They exiled her, she left. Taking her back now seems like we are doing their dirty work for them." Carson glared at his deputy, but some of the certainty had left his posture. He looked at Ophelia again, then at Nathan and his gathered men, clearly calculating odds he did not like. "This is not over," he said finally. "I am going to wire the territorial marshal, let him decide what is legal and what is not." "You do that," Nathan said. "And while you are at it, tell the marshal that the Broken Spur is sovereign land, and any attempt to make arrests here without proper jurisdiction will be met with appropriate resistance. Tell him Nathan Drummond said that." Carson mounted his horse with poor grace, his deputies following suit. "You are making powerful enemies, Drummond. I hope she is worth it." "She is worth everything," Nathan said simply. After the sheriff and his men rode off, the tension slowly bled out of the yard. The ranch hands dispersed, going back to their work but casting worried glances at Ophelia. Nathan took her hand and led her into the house, into his office, and closed the door. "You should not have done that," Ophelia said, her voice shaking. "You should not have risked your ranch, your men, for me. Nathan, if they were murderers, you did not know that." Nathan took her shoulders, making her look at him. "You helped wounded men. That is all you knew, all you could have known. You are not responsible for their crimes. But I am responsible for bringing this trouble to your door. No, Fort Lyon is responsible for that. They exiled you into the desert with no supplies and no horse. They essentially sentenced you to death, and when you survived anyway, they decided it was not punishment enough. Damn them, Ophelia. Damn every small-minded hypocrite in that town." Ophelia felt tears burning her eyes. What if the marshal sides with them? What if they come back with more men? Nathan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart beating, fast but steady, and she wrapped her arms around him and held on like he was the only solid thing in the world. "Then we will deal with it," he said into her hair. "Together. I meant what I said, Ophelia. You are worth everything to me. I am not letting anyone take you away." The waiting was agonizing. Days stretched into weeks with no word from the territorial marshal. Nathan posted extra guards, and everyone on the ranch moved with heightened awareness, eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The strain was wearing on all of them. Ophelia threw herself into work, treating the inevitable injuries of ranch life, keeping the books meticulously updated, anything to keep her mind occupied. But at night, lying alone in her room, the fear crept in. She thought about the 3 young outlaws she had treated, wondered if they really had killed a marshal, wondered if her mercy had helped murderers escape justice. The uncertainty was corrosive. Nathan found her one evening sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in a shawl against the October chill, staring out at nothing. He sat beside her without speaking, just a warm presence in the gathering dark. "I keep thinking I should leave," Ophelia said quietly. "Head to California, change my name, start over where no one knows about any of this. It would be safer for you." "You want to leave?" She turned to look at him. His face was serious, open, waiting for her honest answer. "No, I want to stay here with you. I want to build a life on this land and never run from anything again. But what I want does not change the danger I have brought to your door." Nathan reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm, rough with calluses, solid and real. "Do you remember what I told Sheriff Carson? That you are worth everything. I meant it, Ophelia. The ranch, the cattle, all of it means nothing if I lose you. I would burn the broken spur to the ground myself before I let you walk away to protect me." "That is crazy," she whispered. "Maybe, but love makes people crazy." He brought her hand to his lips, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Marry me." Ophelia's breath stopped. "What? Marry me, be my wife, officially and legally. Let me stand beside you not just as the man who took you in, but as your husband. Let me have the legal right to fight for you, to protect you. Marry me, Ophelia." She stared at him, her mind reeling. "Nathan, we have only known each other a few months, and I am still technically in mourning, and there is a sheriff who wants to arrest me. This is possibly the worst time imaginable to get married. I know. But I also know that I love you more than I have ever loved anyone. I know that I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my life. I know that if something happened and I never got the chance to call you my wife, I would regret it until my dying day." He shifted to kneel on the step below her, still holding her hand. "I am not proposing because of the trouble with the law. I am proposing because I cannot imagine my life without you in it. So what do you say? Will you marry me?" Ophelia looked into his golden brown eyes and saw her entire future there. A future of hard work and simple joys, of long rides across beautiful land, of healing and books and honest labor. Of love, fierce and uncomplicated and true. Her late husband would have wanted her to be happy. she realized. He had been a kind man who would never have wished her to spend the rest of her life alone out of some misplaced sense of loyalty to his memory. "Yes," she said, and felt something tight in her chest finally release. "Yes, I will marry you." Nathan surged up and kissed her, deep and passionate, and Ophelia kissed him back with everything in her. When they broke apart, both breathless, he was grinning like a fool. "We will do it tomorrow," he said. "There is a circuit preacher who comes through the valley once a month. He is due any day. The moment he arrives, we marry." "So eager to tie yourself to a wanted woman," she teased. "So eager to tie myself to you," he corrected, and kissed her again. The circuit preacher arrived 3 days later, a weathered old man named Reverend Michaels, who had been riding through Colorado territory for 30 years. He married them in the ranch house parlor with Louisa, and the ranch hands as witnesses. Ophelia wore her best dress, simple blue cotton that Louisa had spent 2 days altering and decorating with lace. Nathan wore a clean white shirt and actually combed his hair, though it still fell across his forehead in that way she found unbearably attractive. When Reverend Michaels pronounced them husband and wife, Nathan kissed her with such obvious joy that the ranch hands cheered and Louisa cried. They celebrated with a feast that Louisa had been secretly preparing for days, and someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing in the yard under the stars. Late that night, Nathan carried Ophelia over the threshold into his bedroom, now their bedroom. He set her down gently and then just looked at her for a long moment, his expression full of wonder. "My wife," he said softly. "My husband," she replied, and pulled him down to kiss her. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that left them both breathless. Nathan was gentle with her, attentive to her needs, and Ophelia found herself responding with an abandon she had never experienced before. When they finally lay tangled together in the aftermath, sweaty and satisfied, she felt wholly at peace for the first time since her exile from Fort Lyon. "I love you," she whispered against his chest. "I love you too," Nathan replied, his arms tightening around her. "Forever, Ophelia, I am yours forever." The response from the territorial marshal came 2 weeks after their wedding. A lone rider arrived bearing an official letter, and Nathan read it aloud to Ophelia in the privacy of their bedroom. The marshal's decision was measured and political. He acknowledged that Fort Lyon had already administered punishment by exiling Ophelia, and that pursuing additional charges would be redundant and potentially inflammatory. However, he also made it clear that Ophelia was not welcome to return to Fort Lyon and that she should consider herself fortunate that the matter was being dropped. It was not a full exoneration, but it was enough. "It is over," Nathan said, setting the letter aside. "You are safe." Ophelia felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Nathan pulled her into his arms and she cried against his shoulder while he murmured reassurances and stroked her hair. The fear that had been her constant companion for months finally released its grip, and she could breathe freely again. Over the following year, Ophelia fully claimed her place as mistress of the Broken Spur. She expanded her medical practice to include not just the ranch hands but families from neighboring ranches, becoming known throughout the valley as a skilled healer. She continued managing the books and discovered she had a talent for negotiation, securing better prices for their beef and finding new markets for their horses. Nathan watched his wife blossom with obvious pride. She had filled the empty spaces in his house and his heart, transforming the Broken Spur from a place of work into a true home. The ranch hands adored her, Louisa treated her like a daughter, and Nathan himself fell more in love with her every single day. In the spring of 1880, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant. She told Nathan over dinner one evening, unable to keep the news inside any longer. He stared at her for a moment in shock, then let out a whoop of joy that brought Louisa running from the kitchen in alarm. When he explained, Louisa started crying and hugging Ophelia and planning the nursery all in the same breath. The pregnancy was not easy. Ophelia was sick for the first 4 months, barely able to keep food down. Nathan was attentive to the point of being overprotective, fretting over her constantly until she finally had to order him out of the house so she could have some peace. But despite the discomfort, Ophelia was deeply happy. She had never imagined she would have children, and the thought of bringing a new life into the world with Nathan filled her with joy. Their son was born in December, right as the first major snowstorm of winter hit the valley. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Nathan, pacing outside the bedroom where Louisa attended his wife, genuinely feared he might lose them both. But Ophelia was strong, and when the baby's cry finally split the air, Nathan burst into the room to find his wife exhausted but smiling, holding a squalling red infant. "A boy," Louisa announced proudly. "Big and healthy." Nathan approached the bed slowly, almost reverently. Ophelia shifted the baby so he could see properly. "Would you like to hold your son?" Nathan took the infant carefully, supporting his head the way Ophelia had shown him with the doll she made him practice on. The baby was so small, so impossibly fragile, with a wisp of dark hair and eyes that were still unfocused. Looking down at his son, Nathan felt his throat tighten with emotion so powerful he could barely speak. "He is perfect," he managed. "You are amazing. I love you so much. I love you too." Ophelia smiled tiredly. What should we name him? They had discussed names endlessly during the pregnancy, never quite settling on anything. But looking at his son, Nathan suddenly knew. "William, after your father, the man who taught you that healing is not conditional, that mercy matters." William Drummond. Ophelia's eyes filled with tears. "He would have been honored. William it is." William grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's golden brown eyes and his mother's quick mind. The ranch hands doted on him, teaching him to ride almost before he could walk properly. Nathan was a devoted father, patient and loving, never too busy with ranch work to play with his son. Ophelia divided her time between caring for William, her medical practice, and the ranch books, somehow managing all three with her characteristic efficiency. In the summer of 1882, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in March of 1883, she gave birth to a daughter they named Catherine. Catherine had her mother's delicate features and dark blonde hair, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she was born. The years flowed past in a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. The Broken Spur prospered under Nathan and Ophelia's joint management, growing into one of the most successful ranches in southern Colorado. They bought additional land, increased their herds, and built a reputation for fair dealing that made them respected throughout the territory. William grew into a thoughtful boy who loved books and learning, showing more interest in the ranch's business side than the cattle themselves. Catherine was her father's shadow, fearless and wild, more comfortable on horseback than on her own feet. Nathan taught both children to ride and work cattle, while Ophelia taught them to read and figure and think critically. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1889, Nathan took Ophelia riding up to a high meadow he had first shown her during their courtship. It was summer and the wildflowers were in full bloom, painting the meadow in sweeps of purple and gold. They dismounted and stood looking out over the valley, the Broken Spur spread below them like a patchwork quilt. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked quietly. "Staying here instead of going on to California or back east to civilization." Ophelia leaned against him, his arm coming naturally around her shoulders. Not for a single moment. This is my home, Nathan. You and the children and this beautiful land. This is everything I ever wanted but never knew to ask for. Even after everything that happened, the exile, the fear, all of it, especially after all of that. She turned to face him fully, cupping his face in her hands. You told me once that mercy is never a crime on your land. You gave me a place where compassion was valued over judgment, where I could be fully myself. You gave me love and family and purpose. I would live through the exile 100 times if it meant ending up here with you. Nathan kissed her, slow and deep, tasting of forever. I am the lucky one. You transformed my life, Ophelia. Made it mean something beyond just building and acquiring. You taught me that mercy matters, that kindness has value. You gave me children and love and a reason to build something lasting. They stood together in the meadow as the sun moved slowly across the sky. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of meaning and purpose in the wild heart of Colorado territory. By 1895, William was 15 and already helping manage the ranch finances with his mother, showing a shrewd business sense that Nathan claimed came entirely from Ophelia's side of the family. Catherine was 12 and riding better than most of the cowboys, already talking about wanting to compete in the rodeos that were becoming popular throughout the West. Fort Lyon, which had once cast Ophelia out so cruelly, had changed leadership several times. The new sheriff occasionally did business with the Broken Spur, though he and Ophelia maintained a cool professional distance. Most of the people who had condemned her were gone now, died or moved away, replaced by newcomers who knew nothing of the old scandal. The few who remained had learned to keep their opinions to themselves. The Drummond family was too wealthy and influential to antagonize. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, Ophelia would think about those 3 young outlaws who had stumbled to her door so long ago. She never learned what happened to them, whether they were caught or escaped, whether they truly were murderers or just scared boys in over their heads. She had made peace with her choice to help them. Whatever they had done before or after that night, in that moment they had needed mercy, and she had given it. She could live with that. In the spring of 1896, a traveling photographer came through the valley. Nathan commissioned a formal family portrait. The 4 of them posed in front of the ranch house. William stood tall beside his father, already nearly as tall, serious and handsome in his Sunday suit. Catherine sat on her mother's lap, unable to fully suppress her usual energy even for the photograph. Ophelia's hair had threads of silver now, and Nathan's face carried the lines of hard years and good laughter. But their eyes were the same, his golden brown gaze finding hers even in the stillness of the photograph, full of enduring love. The photograph would hang in the ranch house for generations, a testament to the family built on mercy and stubbornness, on love that refused to bow to judgment or convention. Under it, Ophelia would place a small brass plaque engraved with the words Nathan had spoken to her so long ago, words that had become the foundation of their life together. Mercy is never a crime. William eventually took over management of the Broken Spur, marrying a school teacher from Denver and bringing her home to the ranch. They gave Nathan and Ophelia 4 grandchildren. Catherine married a rancher from the next valley over, a match that united 2 of the largest spreads in the region. She raised horses and children with equal passion, becoming famous throughout Colorado for her breeding program. Nathan and Ophelia lived to see their children grown and their grandchildren thriving. They grew old together on the land they had built, never spending a night apart if they could help it. Nathan's hair went fully white, and his body grew stiff from years of hard work, but his eyes remained the same clear golden brown that Ophelia had fallen in love with. Ophelia's hands developed arthritis that eventually forced her to give up the medical practice. But her mind stayed sharp, and she continued managing the books until her vision began to fail. On a warm summer evening in 1908, they sat together on the porch of the ranch house they had shared for nearly 30 years. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. William was working in the office, continuing the legacy they had built. Catherine was visiting with her husband, their voices drifting from the kitchen where they helped Louisa with dinner. Louisa herself was ancient now, more family than employee, presiding over the household with the same firm kindness she had shown since the beginning. "It has been a good life," Nathan said, holding Ophelia's hand in his. Both their hands were aged now, marked with liver spots and the evidence of long years, but their fingers still laced together with the same natural ease they had always had. "The best life," Ophelia agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible. You remember the day I found you in my yard, half dead from thirst and exposure?" Ophelia laughed softly. "I must have looked like such a mess. I cannot imagine what you thought. I thought you were the most determined woman I had ever seen. You had walked through hell and survived it, and something in your eyes told me you would survive anything. I was right about that." "We survived it together," Ophelia corrected. She leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture so familiar after decades of marriage that neither thought about it. "You saved my life that day, Nathan." "No," he said firmly. "We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the valley in a wash of orange and gold, painting the mountains in shades of purple and rose. The air smelled of sage and horses and the good earth of Colorado. Somewhere in the house, someone started playing the old fiddle and music drifted out through the open windows. "I would do it all again," Ophelia said suddenly. "Every bit of it. The exile, the fear, the danger. All of it if it meant ending up here with you." Nathan lifted her hand to his lips, kissed her knuckles with the same reverence he had shown when they were young. "As would I. Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life, Ophelia Drummond." "And loving you has been mine," she replied. The grandchildren's laughter rang out again, pure and joyful. The cattle lowed in the distance, the ranch settling into its evening routine. Inside the house, their children were building their own memories, their own stories. The broken spur would continue long after Nathan and Ophelia were gone. A legacy built on the radical notion that mercy matters, that compassion has value, that love is stronger than judgment. As darkness fell softly over the Colorado Valley, Nathan and Ophelia sat together under the stars they had watched for 30 years, their hands clasped, their hearts still beating as one. They had been young once, desperate and afraid, finding each other in the hardest of circumstances. They had built something beautiful from that unlikely beginning, something that would endure long after they themselves had passed into memory. The night was warm and peaceful. The ranch hummed with life and love. And sitting there together, Nathan and Ophelia knew with perfect certainty that they had lived well, loved fully, and created a legacy that honored the simple truth that had brought them together. Mercy is never a crime when love leads the way. Years passed in the rhythm of seasons, the cycle of life continuing at the broken spur. Nathan lived to be 76, still riding his beloved land until just months before his death in 1914. He passed peacefully in his sleep, holding Ophelia's hand, his last words a whisper of her name. Ophelia mourned him deeply, but without the desperate grief of her first widowhood. This was a different kind of loss, the natural ending of a life fully shared. They had been blessed with 41 years together, and not a single one had been wasted. She lived 3 more years, spending her days with her children and grandchildren. sharing stories of the early days, of the wild Colorado territory, of the handsome cowboy who had saved her life and won her heart. In the spring of 1917, she developed pneumonia, and despite Catherine's devoted nursing and William's desperate search for modern doctors, her body simply decided it was time to rest. On her last day, surrounded by her children, Ophelia was lucid and calm. "Do not grieve too long," she told them. "I have lived more than most people ever dream of. I have loved and been loved, built something meaningful, raised good children. I am ready to see your father again." She closed her eyes that evening and never opened them again. They buried her beside Nathan on a hill overlooking the ranch, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names, dates, and beneath, the words that had defined their life together. "Mercy is never a crime." The broken spur continued through generations of Drummonds, each one raised on the story of how it all began. How a desperate woman and a compassionate cowboy found each other in the hardest of times and built something that lasted. The ranch changed with the times, modernized and adapted, but the core values remained the same. The current generation of Drummond still told the story of Ophelia's exile and Nathan's declaration, still lived by the principle that compassion matters more than judgment. In the ranch house, the photograph from 1896 still hung on the wall, a young family frozen in time, their eyes bright with hope and love. Beside it hung the original brass plaque with its simple message, polished regularly by caring hands. Visitors to the ranch always paused to read it, to hear the story, to be reminded that even in the hardest times, in the wildest places, mercy and love could create miracles. The valley still stretched vast and beautiful, the mountains still crowned with snow, the land still rich and productive. The cattle still grazed the ranges, the horses still ran in the corrals. And on warm summer evenings, when the light fell just right across the porch of the ranch house, if you stood very still and listened carefully, you could almost hear the echo of laughter, the murmur of loving voices, the enduring testimony to a love that had transformed two lives and built a legacy that would never fade. This was the story of Ophelia and Nathan Drummond, of mercy and love, of exile and redemption, of two hearts finding each other in the wild heart of Colorado territory and building something that would last forever. It was a story worth remembering, worth telling, worth honoring, because it proved that even in the hardest times, when the world seemed cruel and unforgiving, compassion could still triumph. Love could still conquer. Mercy was never, ever a crime. And so the broken spur stood, generation after generation, a living monument to the truth that had brought it into being, a testament to the power of choosing kindness over judgment, love over fear, mercy over cruelty. It stood as proof that sometimes, in the most unlikely places, in the most desperate circumstances, two souls could find each other and change everything. Forever.